this is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm doing a sequel, a part 2, to a video that I first did in December of 2019, which is book and tea pairings. This was an idea that I got from Maya at Maya Reads. She did one of these videos, so I thought I'm stealing that idea. In that first video, I paired 7 of my favorite teas that I had on hand with books that I felt fit them in some way. And I would say that video was fairly well received so far as videos on my channel go. There were a couple of people who said they would like to see a part 2, and my response was, oh yes, I would love to do a part 2, but inside my head I was thinking, how many favorite teas do you think I have? It's been nearly a couple years now, and I've had some turnover in my tea collection. This is going to be a shorter list. This is only 5 teas. Some of my preferences, I like loose leaf and full leaf teas. I'm not big on herbal teas. I like there to be actual tea in my tea, and I like the actual tea to be the first ingredient, not like here's a bunch of stuff that has a few tea leaves stuck in it in a tea bag. That said, I'm not a purist when it comes to flavors. I do really like flavored teas, specifically fruity and floral flavors. Someday I may end up learning enough about tea to be a real tea snob. I do not consider myself to be a real tea snob yet. In terms of the books, all of the books on this list ended up being fantasy books. I didn't do that on purpose, but in order to properly present this list, I may indicate that in the video title that this is fantasy books paired with teas. I do think there were a couple science fiction books in that previous video. So I have 2 white teas, 2 green teas, and 1 black tea on this list. The first white tea I'm going to talk about is by Hao Yinzhen. This is a silver needle white tea. This one is from Harney Sons, but I would say that most high-end tea brands and tea stores will sell some form of silver needle white tea. Harney Sons sells 2 of them. This is the cheaper one. I think they call the other one Chinese silver needle, and I gave some of that to my dad as a gift some time ago, so I have tasted it. I've not done like a side-by-side taste test between the 2, and I am not a savvy enough tea taster to be able to tell you what the difference is. So the one I buy for myself is the cheap one. Silver needle tea looks like this. You get these basically like whole baby leaves that are fuzzy. They have sort of silver fuzz on them. It's a relatively unprocessed tea. You see the leaves, you get the leaves, and the scent of this is like extremely fresh and bright. This smells like plants that have dried in the sun. Silver needle is a Chinese tea, so I have paired this with a book with a Chinese-esque fantasy setting, and that is The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nghi, which is a short novella that is nominated for a Hugo Award this year. Like the tea, this is a deceptively simple book that has a lot of richness and subtle flavor to it. It tells the story of the life of an empress through the memories of her handmaiden telling the story of her time with the empress to a historian. And it's a meditation on memory and history, truths and fictions. It would be excellent to read over a relaxing and mind-clearing cup of something like the Bai Hao Yinzhen. This tea is also incredibly good for re-steeping. I can usually get several good steeps out of one batch of these leaves that don't degrade in quality too much as they go, which reminds me that I have the second book in this series, the Singing Hills cycle, on my Kindle waiting for me when the tiger came down the mountain. One of many, many books that I do hope to pick up soon. The second white tea that I want to talk about is a flavored white tea. This is one that I received as a gift and am sadly nearly finished with. It is this white cranberry tea from Murchie's, which is a Canadian brand. My friend got this for me when visiting one of their locations in, I think, Victoria, BC. I have never been to a Murchie's store myself, and I have never bought tea from them myself. So this is the only tea of theirs I've ever tried, and I like it quite a lot. It's got a more like flaky, crumbly white tea leaf with like dried half cranberries in it. It smells incredibly sweet and fruity, but not like artificially sweet at all. This is a tea that is ostensibly a holiday tea, but I do not save it for the holidays. I have been drinking it year-round. And so to pair with this, I have chosen a book that is ostensibly a holiday book that I did not read during the holidays, and I don't think you need to read it during the holidays either. That's Hogfather by Pratchett. This is the 4th book in the Death sub-series of Discworld, and I do recommend reading the Death books in order. There are some overarching character stories that carry over from one book to the next. This is, however, by far my favorite of the novels in the Death series that I have read. There is one more, Thief of Time, which I haven't read yet, and people I trust have told me that it's like one of the best Discworld novels, so I really should read that. I was getting these from the library and I kind of just dropped the ball on that one after I read Hogfather. This is a zany fantasy story of what happens when someone sets out to assassinate the Hogfather, which is Discworld's equivalent of Santa Claus, and Death has to step in. It is all about belief in this sort of myth, what the function of it is in society and like for the human psyche, and it's also just zany good fun. Next is the first of the 2 green teas that I want to talk about. This is also a flavored green tea. This is the maple walnut green tea from the Perennial tea room in Seattle. This happens to be the tea that I am drinking right now. This was also a gift. I'm also very low on this. I needed to film this video now because I was about to run out of both of these teas and then I wouldn't have them anymore. But this is one where I wouldn't have picked this tea out for myself because I really don't like walnuts. I was pleasantly surprised by this though, because while I generally dislike nuts, I can sometimes enjoy them in things, and like usually the things I enjoy them in are sweets. But apparently, sometimes tea can do it for me too. This is a fairly sweet tea because of the maple, but again, not artificially so. And mostly for me, this is a tea that evokes the sense of forests and woods. This is a very woodsy green tea. And so to pair with this woodsy green tea, I have chosen a woodsy green book, which is Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh. This is another very short novella, and it is like pure woodsy forest magic vibes. This is one that I read like last summer of 2020, and that was a period of time when I was not on top of wrap-up, so I don't think I ever actually did a wrap-up for this book on my channel, which is too bad. This is a take on the mythic idea of the Green Man. It's about a man named Tobias, who is the wild man who lives in these woods, and he is secretly like the green man of the forest. He's magically tied to the forest. So he's an immortal mythic figure, but he wasn't always. Things change for him when a young man named Henry Silver buys the nearby like manor house and starts poking his nose into things in the woods. There's a bit of a romance there. And the sort of folklore aspect of this was interesting to me because it's less about the type of folklore that usually gets retold in fantasy novels and more about the sort of local lore that comes from history from a very specific place being sort of passed down through generations and mythologized. There's a sequel to this called Drowned Country that I have out from the library now, and I'm looking forward to reading it. All 3 of these books so far have been things that have sequels I still need to read. The last 2 books, I promise, are standalones. The second flavored green tea I have to talk about is this Rose Sencha from Alice's Teacup. Alice's Teacup is a tea house with, I think these days, maybe only 2 locations in New York City. maybe 3 if you count the one that's not a sit-down restaurant. They will sell their loose leaf teas in person if you go to the restaurant locations. They also do have an online store that I think has been closed lately, but I will leave the link in case it reopens. I absolutely love rose flavor in tea. I love it in food and dessert things, but like I love it especially in tea. And I like this for pretty much the same reason that I love the rose-scented Harney Sons black tea that I talked about in my first video on book and tea pairings, because this is a simple tea. The base tea is very, very simple, and then there's one flavor, and it is rose, and it is very obviously rose. You smell it and you smell the rose, you taste it and you taste the rose. The book that I paired in that first video with the rose-scented black tea was Rose Daughter by Robin McKinley, which is the more intense of her 2 Beauty and the Beast retellings. So it makes sense for me that with the green tea, the Rose Sencha, I should pair this with the lighter and less intense Robin McKinley Beauty and the Beast retelling, which is Beauty. My copy of this has a rose on the cover. This is a little bit less about the roses than Rose Daughter was. Like, Rose Daughter has a lot of rose gardening in it. But there are definitely some lovely magical roses in this book. This is a fairly simple and straightforward but exceedingly cozy retelling of Beauty and the Beast from the 70s, I think. Let me get an exact publication date. 1978. This was Robin McKinley's debut novel. I have had this on my bedside table, like, as a must reread immediately. This is my next reread for ages now. And when I picked it out for this video a couple days ago, when I was puttering around with the idea of doing book and tea pairings, I sort of tripped and fell and started rereading it by accident, and now I'm 2/3 of the way through. So I will be talking more about this book in a future wrap-up. For me, this is a pretty relaxing, warm hug of a book. The story is predictable. It doesn't take too many liberties with the original tale. And I think it is a really good fit for me for this comforting, warm hug of a tea. Next is a more complicated flavored tea paired with a more complicated fairy tale retelling. This is the only black tea in this video, which is a little odd given that like most of the tea I drink is actually black tea. But this is the tea that when I saw it and bought it, it gave me the push to put this video together and film it. Because this tea, I grabbed it off a shelf in the tea store because it has the same name as a book. And that is Winter Rose, which is a black tea from Sullivan Street Tea and Spice Company. That's another New York company. I bought this from their physical store, but I'm sure you can buy it online. This bag I bought is actually tea bags, little sachets of full leaf tea. The only tea I have here that is tea bags as opposed to real loose leaf, but I'll bet they probably sell this in loose leaf as well. So you'll notice it's another rose tea, but for me, the rose is not actually the predominant flavor in this black tea. The ingredients here, it's Indian black tea with lavender, rose petals, ginger, peach. So those are the flavors. And I do smell and taste the rose in this, but for me, the lavender and the ginger are both more predominant. I would notice those first before I would notice the rose if you didn't tell me what was in this. And overall, the combination of flavors is very, I would call it herbal, not in the sense of like herbal tea, but in terms of that sort of rich fragrance of dried plants. It's got like a very strong and sharp flavor, if that makes any sense. This is the rare tea that I would say for me is actually equally good, both plain and with a little bit of milk and honey. Like, those are both really good flavors for me. Usually, if I really like the flavor of a tea, I won't dilute it with milk or sugar or honey or anything. Usually I use those to make less exciting tea palatable. And also, usually I wouldn't use milk in a tea with either floral or fruity flavor, and you'll notice most of my favorites are floral or fruity, but it works in this one for some reason, even though this tea really doesn't need it. And I think I already gave away the game with what book I'm pairing with this, because I told you that this tea has the same name as a book title. So of course I am pairing it with Winter Rose by Patricia A. McKillip, which is a loose Tam Lin retelling, sort of. I will say I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as your first McKillip book. It is one of the more confusing ones that I've read. Her writing can get like extremely lyrical with this heightened magic stuff going on where it's very hard to tell what's literally happening. And that definitely happens a lot in this one. So this is maybe not a book for McKillip beginners, certainly not a book for fantasy beginners, just as I might argue that this sort of complicated flavored tea might not be a tea for beginners either. So these are both like rich and complicated with cold weather vibes. So I was hoping that I would be able to actually draw parallels between the tea and the book with the same name, and I think I can. I mentioned saying that this tea feels sort of herbal to me. It does have some of that like woodsy wilderness feel to it that this book also has in terms of like living on the edge of the woods and like going out into the woods to gather herbs and stuff. So I do think this is a good match. And this is definitely a book I would recommend for more adventurous fairy tale fantasy readers. If you're looking for an easier place to start with McKillip's books, I would recommend either The Book of Atrix Wolf or The Bell at Sealy Head or The Changeling Sea. Possibly, or The Forgotten Beasts of Eld. I think those are all more accessible. Anyhow, that's it. That's my list for today of 5 teas I have been enjoying recently, plus fantasy books that I think pair well with them. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you are interested in any of these books. Let me know if you're interested in any of these teas, if you share similar tea tastes with me or not, or even if you're not a tea drinker at all, feel free to let me know you were here. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.